Let me welcome you both, Kate and Vladan, Kate Crawford and Vladan Joler, to a talk in the framework of Vladan's solo exhibition at the of Biennial Budapest, entitled Inhale. The exhibition Allegories of an Automated Present will be on view from the 23rd of April till the 30th of May at Óbudai Gasworks in Budapest. And so let me shortly introduce you both. Kate Crawford is a scholar of social and political implications of artificial intelligence, whose work has focused on understanding large-scale data systems and machine learning and AI in the wider context of history, politics, labor, and the environment. Vladan Joler, who defines himself as an artist and researcher, retired game hacker, bureaucrat, do-it-yourself enthusiast, developer, scout, old and new media maker, atheist, activist, passionate proponent of open code, society and data, and a designer where he has when he has to be one, among many other professions. So, so warm welcome. These are your words, Vladan. And we just see in the diverse backgrounds behind us, behind Kate and Vladan, the cover of the new book of Kate, Atlas of AI, which was just published last week. And the cover was designed by Vladan. So, and there are beautiful illustrations of him in the book. Yeah, little advertisement and yeah. So I would suggest to start to talk about a project what you did together under the title Anatomy of an AI System. This project provides us with a critical map of the full life cycle of the Amazon Echo. And it was published widely. It won the Bisley Design of the Year award in 2019. In the meantime, it's part of the collections of Museum of Modern Art, New York, and V&A in London. And so it is about the topic of artificial intelligence, especially a particular product of artificial intelligence. Vladan, you mentioned it in a talk that Anatomy of an AI was never meant to be an art project. Could you elaborate on what it was meant to be then?
Oh, that's a tough question. So I'm not so sure that we ever like defined like what the in which box we want to put that map, but it was sure from the moment when Kate and I met, it was sure that we want to do it. We want to create something like this, and basically that was even the first time Kate and I met each other. We met each other around the table. And we started to draw that map, like so that was like really interesting, and that was like in one event that was organized by Mozilla Foundation, and that was the first moment from where all of these like strange events that will follow up later happened, and so yeah, it was never meant to be an art. Even but maybe like 1 or 2 years before that, like my previous map that is called Facebook Algorithmic Factory already started to appear in some galleries and museums and stuff like this, and So it was kind of like, you know, in the realm of possible that maybe also this one will go into that direction. But it was, you know, idea was not that. Idea was to create some kind of like tool or some kind of like map, mostly for us and for people around us, to understand this kind of complex reality behind, let's say, all of those like invisible layers of production, of birth, life, and death of one device. Yeah.
It's funny. I remember, Vladan, when we were in the room sitting around a table and we were meeting for the first time, and we were sort of trying to sketch out on this piece of butcher's paper, it's about this big, how you make a voice-enabled AI system. And I can remember we started drawing, and you had this kind of little sort of circles for, you know, where the data was going, and you were like, oh, do you understand what happens with the training data? I'm like, yeah, I understand this piece, but then we have to go back a layer, and then we have to go back another layer and get another piece of paper and another piece of paper. And I remember at the end of the day, we just had 16 huge pieces of paper with little parts of this puzzle. And it was clear that this was a really big question to answer, which is like, what does it take to actually make an AI system like an Amazon Echo from birth to death, you know, the sort of cradle to grave? And I think for us, Vladan, if I can speak for us, it was, we wanted to know ourselves. Like, it was almost like it was driven by curiosity and research, and rather than saying, we know what we're going to make an art object, it was much more about, let's do an investigation.
Yeah, and in a sense, I think even in that moment, the you know, there was a lot of pieces of that map existing out there. You know, like a lot of different like researchers, artists, scholars, so, you know, like investigators, journalists, like explored different parts of this map. And for example, like supply chains, or like cargo traffic, or, you know, mining problems, or environmental impact, or, you know, like e-waste. So all of those like pieces were out there, but in a way, what was not there, it's like a big picture, in a sense, like one big picture that will you know, combine all of those things together. So for example, in my case, like, I was really comfortable with the let's say this middle part of the map, because that was something that I was kind of like researching for years, and I knew how to, you know, investigate different parts of that, and I knew. But then, like, all of those like birth and death of devices, that was kind of new for me, and that was like really exciting also, like to you know, to read more about that, to go to some places, to to investigate. That was really fun.
Yeah, and actually in all three parts of the map, not only the technical shift, what is presented by artificial intelligence, but the cultural shift is mapped out. And that's also quite an interesting and also very important layer, or multiple layers actually of your study, to investigate the cultural shift caused by artificial intelligence and the technologies behind it. Do you plan well, maybe first it would be interesting for the audience if we could briefly, I don't know, just pick a few stories, or maybe just one story from Anatomy of an AI that is particularly interesting, or what was particularly revealing for you.
There are so many. I mean, it's interesting. People tend to focus, you know, very much on the map itself, but of course, the way that we conceptualize the project is both as a map and an essay. And I think in some ways, you need them to speak to each other to really understand what is happening in the map, and then you need the map to understand what's happening in the essay. So that idea of stories and narratives and histories is incredibly important to how we build and understand and interpret that map. So that meant not only thinking spatially and thinking in space, but also thinking in time. So for me, when I think of one of the stories in time that I still find incredibly powerful that we researched for this project is the story of the tree, the Palequium gutta tree. Mm-hmm. And this tree, of course, was the part of an enormous boom in the construction of undersea cables, which were used to, of course, drive telegraphy and telecommunications. But that moment in the Victorian era where they realized that the milky white latex that comes from the Palequium gutta, which is known as gutta percha, that this could be used to insulate the copper wires inside the undersea cables. But to do so required cutting down hundreds of thousands of trees to produce really just one of these enormous undersea cables. So the more cables were laid, the more trees were felled, and then you have all of these Malay and Dayak workers, cutting down these trees in Malaysia and Singapore to the point where the tree is made extinct. We have these undersea cables as a legacy of the forests that once were, that have now been turned into infrastructure for telecommunications. And to see that as a parable of the early Victorian information age as being connected to a type of extraction and exploitation of the natural environment, and also connected, of course, to labor exploitation. The Dayak and Malay workers were paid next to nothing in extremely harsh conditions of producing this latex. And then what we see is the story of infrastructure played out once again in artificial intelligence. So for me, that's one of these stories that recurs through time. And in the map, you can see it. It's a very small part of the map, but you can see the cross sections of the undersea cables, and you can see all of the components that go into them. And each one of those components also has a history that traces back into the idea of extraction and reaching the limits of what the earth can sustain.
Mm-hmm. The thing is, there's so many details or so many points on that map that are, some of them, maybe 1% of those things that exist in the map have a part in the essay. And 95% of the map but doesn't have, it's not explained in the essay. So there is so many, because in a way you can read that map as any other map, it's not linear narrative. So the maps are, you're reading the map however you want, you can start from there. And in a way, the essay that we presented, it's just one way to read that map. It's just one possible, let's say, stream of events. Mm-hmm. And we can build many others, but I think people, there is so many people that really love that essay in a sense of more, not more than a map, but in a way there are people who are concentrated on the essay, and then other people who are more concentrated on the map. It depends on a crowd, and depends on different. Yeah, but what I was also, that story, it's also one of my favorite, and but I also think, and then later I was always thinking how how it will be to have that map in different periods of time, how this complex planetary scale factory looked in 50s, or how it looked in 100 years ago, or how it looks 500 years ago. And in a sense, this is something that Kate and I are kind of working now on. I should not go into details.
Secret big project.
But always in whenever when I was researching something, some of this contemporary phenomena of this kind of planetary scale factory or computation or data, it always like brings me to this kind of like beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It's like concentration of all of those like ideas and technologies and way of exploitation were like born there, most of them, and yeah. So the story about Guta, it's just like one of them. It's just like one of those like Victorian colonial stories that we can like relate to, but like, you know.
So you rather, sorry, but do you rather plan to look into the past than to the future?
I like this. You're digging into the secret project. Well, this is the one of the things that I love about working with you, Vladan. And you know, it's interesting because, of course, Anatomy of AI was our sort of our first collaborative project, and in some ways, you know, very much Atlas of AI, I kind of connect the genesis of this project to that experience we had of trying to trace all of those supply chains in space and in time. And for me, working with you on the cover of this book and also of the illustrations, it again inspires me about the way that you think and represent these ideas in different ways. And so for our new project, which again, we can't talk about too much yet because it's very much in its gestation period, but it is, as you say, looking very much into time and sort of thinking about time itself as a type of, you know, accretion of layers that produce ways of seeing and interpreting the world. So, you know, it's in some ways, I don't know if you've tried to quantify this, Vladan, but I feel like it's almost 10 times bigger than Anatomy of AI in terms of the scale of what it's trying to capture, just because, you know, the first one wasn't hard enough. But it's another thing that I love about working with you is that we you know, are very courageous in terms of the way that we are prepared to go as far as possible in tracing these stories and these histories and these trajectories.
Well, I you know, at the end, I'm not so sure that the scale. I think the scale, it's always the same. You know, like the scale.
Infinite.
Exactly.
Because in a sense of like, I'm not so sure. I technically or physically, I cannot like make a bigger maps in the software that I use, and it's also like really hard to print them. And then also for people, it's really hard. So at the end, it will be the kind of the same map in size, maybe. So it's always the same size. It's always the biggest possible one. And then probably the text will be the similar size because people will be bored to read more.
Yeah, in the end, we will arrive to the infinite map as described in Borges and as quoted in Anatomy of an AI. So yeah, that sounds really challenging and really interesting. And also what I find very interesting in this approach that if you are working with information technology, or at least I do feel that somehow you are obliged to look into the future, to predict the future, to think about the future, what is going to happen, how the technology is developing, and how we are sort of developing together with that. And but on the other hand, probably we cannot go any further, let's say, without elaborating this past and the genealogy of the interrelation between society and technology. So I'm very much looking forward to your secret project. And maybe we could get into the subject of well, we already talked about methodology a little bit, but so we also talked about the differences, because both of you are researchers, but you use very different tools. So this is what Vladan mentioned, that the map is something rather spatial, and text is rather linear. That is one of the main differences. It seems to me that both types of researches are especially fitting tools for addressing the problematic, especially of extractivism and labor inequalities caused by globalized production of technical gadgets or any other sort of technologies, and the downsides of quantified self or further topics you touch upon. Because research is something that allows us to regain at least a tiny bit of agency that surveillance or cognitive capitalism apparently took away from us. My point is that that research seems to be a sort of general necessity, not only for academics or people working at institutions that are traditionally assigned to do research, but literally everyone in our society. And do you think that your project would propel people to look deeper into these questions, or was it one of your aims?
Okay, okay. So yeah, probably that was like one of the aims, because like you know, this map, it's basically calling you to say, hey, but there is this as well, you know, there are these parts of the map is missing, or, you know, like it's calling you to add something, or to claim that something is not, that this is not whole picture, you know. So and I remember when like we published the map, like the you know, this kind of first stream of reactions or tweets from people who are like, hey, you know, there is this part missing, or like that part. And in a sense, like, you know, my perception was like, you know, like this is just our, you know, like our way of like simplifying complexity, simplifying what exists out there, you know, like your potential contribution will be different, you know, like you can build like many other maps, you know, this is not the ultimate one. But the regarding research, I you know, for me, that's like super important, you know, like, because like I think like it's the you know, maybe we have like those kind of like two outputs, like maps and text, you know, but behind that, on the other side, we have many ways of like different kinds of research methodologies to get information in order to create those two outputs. And basically I don't know, for me this kind of like obsession with research started maybe like 6-7 years ago, and it was like really simple. I just wanted to understand what's going on behind the screen. I just wanted to understand how the network looked like, and then it basically started with like trying to find different kinds of like methods to collect data, and then to create something out of this, to create some picture, to create some map or something. So I was basically like you know, like painting some kind of like invisible landscapes by collecting data and transforming this data into something, because there is, for many parts of the infrastructure, there is no way to see anything if you don't collect data, if you don't, you know, like do some kind of data visualization or data analysis. But then, like when I was going deeper and deeper, I was using the different types of, because then you can like each part of data collection or research, each type of research have like own limitations, So then if you are like, for example, like trying to understand how the networks look like, then you are like trace routing. If you are doing this, then you're doing something else. So you need to use like many different types of research in order to see the full picture, to see that this kind of invisible objects or black boxes, to try to see them from different angles. And then one angle, it's maybe data and data collection, data visualization. Another, it's legal research. Another one is, going somewhere and trying to see like how it looks like. Also, we are, those like complexities that we are trying to visualize, they're so complex that we need to use like any possible research method in order to put the light on them. So that was my...
I love the way you put that, because I think it's been one of those experiences of really pushing our capacities at every time. There was no moment where it was sort of comfortably known, where this was knowledge that we already contained. We always had to be pushing into new domains and new methodologies. And and it's interesting too, because I think about the philosopher Georges Didier-Huberman, who sort of writes about what it is to be making maps as fundamentally both in the paradigm of aesthetics as it is as much in the realm of science. So it's sort of combining, the scientific method with the creative act. And I think this process means that maps are never exhausted. They can always be added onto. They're always an invitation to the viewer to add more, to think outside of the lines that we've drawn. And that's really important, because of course maps can also be objects of domination. They can be the trace routes of empire, which of course, as we were building the map, tracing where all of those cables go, show you the lines of colonial power. So, what is it to create maps that do not attempt to be the one way of seeing or another form of centralizing power and control, but that suggest multiplicity, that suggest incompleteness? And I think that's something that we've really tried to do here. And I think of this lovely term that the critical geographer Samantha Saville uses. She describes the idea of a humble geography. I kind of feel like that was always us. Like we don't claim to be the absolute experts at all, but simply to be explorers, and in this sort of very humble way to say, this is what we can see, and we hope that it helps others in looking at the map feel empowered really to have a deeper understanding of artificial intelligence, which is so often held as this kind of object of, impossibility, that you could not possibly understand this incredibly complex, technical, abstract mathematical system. By grounding it, by mapping it, you make it interpretable, understandable. You give people purchase upon it, to grasp it, and then to understand that they have a say in it. So that for me is a political act as much as it is a creative act, and a scientific one.
That's very interesting. The term humble geography will I will definitely put it in my vocabulary. So it's absolutely important to emphasize that that it's also a political act to publish, or to first to create and then to publish such a research. At this point, I would like to mention that since this exhibition and the talk accompanying it is part of the Off-Biennial, the Off-Biennial Budapest is a political project. So it started as an act of prefigurative politics in 2015. as a grassroots statement that was to testify the independence, resilience, and capability of the local art scene in the face of what was widely perceived as governmental trespassing, censorship, and corruption induced in the public sector. These are the words of the curators. And so all the projects being very diverse, but they all have this in common: to be political, to be activists. So the people involved are activists in one sense or the other. In the case of Vladan Solosho and in the case of your common project, it's maybe not that obvious. So it's not demonstrative activism, if I may put it that way. But a rather subtle one. So what I was thinking that it's sort of an inverse neo-ludist approach. Like it's a little bit complicated, but but the point is that that actually I find this story. It's another story from the 19th century, the ludists, which is quite well known, about Ned Ludd, who with his companions smashed looms, and everybody knows ludists as a group of people against technology, which is not true in the end. So they were not protesting against technology; they were protesting against the working conditions implied by the use of new technologies. And it seems that the 21st century needs its neo-ludists as well, but probably smashing Amazon Echo will not help the problem. Neither did it that time, but yeah. So probably the method what you are using is more effective, or at least it would be great. And yeah. So. And my question is whether you thought of your work as a catalyzer of social change. Well, actually, we already discussed this question more or less, but maybe if you could add on some neo-ludist thoughts to it.
Well, I think like it's another like term that we can use that can help us maybe with this. It's called the counter cartography, and basically the act of counter cartography, it's a political act. Like act of mapping the power is a political act, and this is exactly what we are doing in our work. It's to map existing power. To map like how this, like from where this power is coming from. So it's kind of like deeply political in that sense, even if it's maybe not visible like on the first view. If you look this from this idea of counter cartography, and this idea of counter cartography, it's also telling us different story, like because usually like cartography is coming from the maps are coming from the position of power, of king, of empire, and in this case it's coming from the position of like single or two human beings who are like trying to see the empire. So it's completely inverse, and I was kind of confused with this, like what will be the inverse neo-ludism. Like this inverse part is like really confusing to me, but like the usually like when people are, when I'm explaining the map in public, and then people at the end are always asking, okay, but what we can do now, And then, you know, one of the streams of answers, because there is a many answer to that, like many, you can like, you know, do different things, depends like how you are seeing reality or whatever. But one of them, it goes into direction of Ludism or neo-Ludism, you know, like that's for sure, you know, something that this map is provoking, or this map is like, you know, like giving you a picture that is basically leading you to think in the direction, okay, maybe the answer is neo-Ludism. But I don't know, I'm really, personally, I'm really close feel close to this idea of neo-Ludism. I see it appears in like many different fields. It appears, you know, in the way how we live, it appears in the way how we, you know, cook, how we, you know, like there is or how we do different things. And I don't know, maybe that's one of the paths out, but there's many others, you know, like for example, one of the possible, you know, there are some people who say, okay, we have like, maybe we can fix how we produce things, you know, so it's trying to fix the map, you know, and the neo-Ludists will say, but we don't need this map at all. And I think this is like really beautiful radical question, like maybe we don't need this, you know, like, and then some other people will try to regulate this map, will try to make, okay, maybe this line should go like this or go like that, you know. Some people will try to do different things, you know. And then it's also like interesting, the question, like, you know, some people will blame the users and try to say, okay, you are in power, you know, you should not buy Amazon Alexa, you should not. And some other people will maybe blame the one who is behind the map, like the one who profits from this map, you know. So it's a different, I think we have like a lot of different ways to change this map or to change our future, but and I'm not so sure, and I'm really in a sense of like, you know, like I'm really amazed by the people who, you know, are proposing futures, and I'm like, wow, you're great, you know, like how you can do that, you know, like, but I'm confused enough with the present and the past. So I don't like, yeah, like, who knows, like, whatever.
Lívia, I love the way you put this question, because I for a long time found it frustrating that the simplistic story of the Luddites is that they're anti-technology and smashing the looms because they didn't like looms, whereas in actual fact it was always a, you know, it was a labor rights struggle. It was about the actual working conditions in factory and sort of, you know, industrialized contexts. And, you know, I think that's interesting on the map. The part where I think you really get a sense of that is far, far on the left side of the map. There is this pay scale. And, you know, I can remember we were sort of talking about like how much you get paid to work in a mine to extract cobalt out of the earth. And in so many contexts, these mines are in areas of, you know, of conflict and war, and the working conditions are often, you know, borderline slavery conditions and extremely harsh, in some cases lowly paid, if at all. And then to go through the scales, and I can remember when you and I were like, how much do people get paid to sit in a data center? Okay, and how much do you get paid if you're a Facebook engineer? And sort of looking at how those numbers go up and up and up. And then at the top, you have Jeff Bezos, and then looking at that whole distance to realize how many hundreds and thousands of years it would take for the miner to earn the same amount of money that Jeff Bezos makes in a day. And just putting that on a single line, I thought it was really powerful. And I haven't stopped thinking about it, to be honest. I just looked up yesterday that Jeff Bezos has made 75 billion, and this is an estimate because of course it would be changing every day, but 75 billion extra dollars just during the pandemic. So within 12 months, he has earned $75 billion on top of already being the world's richest man. So that to me, again, it's a question of scale. How do you start to scale that much money? And you think about how he is earning that money and what this huge machine is of Amazon and its planetary infrastructure. Why should all of that return back to this one individual, the kind of gross inequity of that? So for me, this is the other thing that's interesting, is not just the kind of deep theme around labor, which is throughout the map. You can see labor exploitation at every part of the channel, but it's also trying to do this work of talking about scale. What happens when we build systems that think in terms of scale is everything? You know, what drops out of the picture? How do you play with scale, and how do you analyze things at different levels of scale? This is something that I think anatomy of an AI system is really useful for, and something that I certainly think is really important in my work as a researcher, is trying to think about not just the ideologies of scale, but how we as people in these systems can start to see the function of scale and what it does to everything from labor to infrastructure to the environment.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for these beautiful answers and many possibilities what you described, and I would now recommend to everyone who is listening to us to visit the exhibition, because the Anatomy of an AI map, as well as the Hungarian translation of the essay in a newspaper, is available there. And I'm really happy that the Hungarian translation of a critical approach to Amazon Echo arrived earlier than Alexa uttering words in Hungarian. In this sense, it was a very rich discussion, and thank you so much for being with us today. And I hope we will have once the chance to see each other in person.
I would love that, and congratulations to you, Lívia, for this extraordinary exhibition and for the Biennale itself, and congratulations to you, Vladan, for the solo show. It's wonderful, and I wish I could be there to go and see it all in person, but hopefully one day.
Yeah, it's a kind of strange definition of solo show, because each of those works are in collaboration with someone, but like, yeah.
you are the node. You're a central node of lots of collaborations, but
you have like this kind of Venn diagram, and then like this kind of middle point, and it's that.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, thank you. Really, really great last words. Okay, so thanks everyone.